This is the story of Mission San Luis. More than 350 years ago, over 1,500 Apalachee Indians, including a powerful Apalachee chief, lived at San Luis. Living there with them were some people who came to Florida from Spain. Some of these people from Spain were called friars. They came to Florida to convince the Indians to give up their own religious beliefs and become Christians. Other Spanish people came to get rich or to serve as soldiers. Although not all Florida Indians welcomed the friars, the Apalachees asked them to come. They believed that the Spanish would protect them from their enemies. The rich soils in Apalachee province made it possible to grow lots of food. Its many lakes and ponds provided fish and turtles, and the nearby Gulf Coast supplied seafood. Although Florida Native Americans had their own diseases, many soon became sick from illnesses the Spanish brought with them, such as smallpox and measles. A lot of Indians living close to the Spanish settlements near the coast, such as St. Augustine, were killed by these deadly diseases and from hard work. Because so many Indians died, the Spanish looked west to Apalachee, where the Indian population was large. They hoped that this land would provide the workers and food needed to supply St. Augustine's soldiers. The first friars sent to build missions among the Apalachees arrived in 1633. In just 2 years, the missionaries had convinced over 5,000 Indians to become Christians. San Luis was the capital of Apalachee and the largest mission. The first public buildings built at the mission were probably the church and the Apalachee Council House. The town plaza was also created at that time. It was common for the Spaniards to marry Indian women. Their children were called mestizos. Most of the Indians living at San Luis had given up their own religion and become Christians. The Apalachees followed the teachings of the Catholic Church, but they still kept many of their traditional beliefs and customs. The best-known example is the Apalachee ball game played by the men of the village. The Apalachee believed that playing the game in the spring and summer helped make sure there would be enough rain for their crops. Like some modern sports, the ball game was violent, and often players were injured or killed. The best players were famous in their villages. The Spanish and the Apalachees lived together at Mission San Luis for nearly 50 years. During this time, almost 3 generations came and went, and a new colonial way of life was born out of native and European traditions. As wives and servants, Apalachee women showed the Spanish how to find and use local plants and animals. They continued to make pottery, which was excellent for cooking and storage. While the Spanish people living at San Luis adopted some of the ways of the Apalachees, they also kept many customs and belongings from their homeland. Animals such as chickens, hogs, and cows were raised at San Luis and shipped to other places to pay for goods brought to the mission from Europe, Mexico, and the Orient. Expensive items imported to San Luis included dishes, cloth, guns, and jewelry. Just as the Spaniards adopted some Indian ways, the Apalachees discovered they liked some European things and foods. They were particularly impressed with beads, cloth, iron tools, farm animals, and sweets. Although the Spaniards and the Apalachees living at San Luis liked some of each other's possessions and foods, they preferred their own ways of life. For example, the Apalachees and the Spaniards had separate neighborhoods at the mission, and each built the kind of buildings they were used to. The Apalachees built round houses covered with palm tree branches. They did not have walls inside. Inside were sleeping benches covered with mats or animal skins and a hearth. The Apalachees spent most of their time outdoors. They used their homes mostly for storage and sleeping. Spanish houses were rectangular with walls of either clay or wooden boards. They were divided into rooms and simply furnished with beds, tables, and storage trunks. The Spanish probably spent more time than the Apalachee indoors and wanted homes that were divided into rooms. In 1670, the British, enemies of Spain, founded Charleston, South Carolina to the north and began sending raiding parties into Spanish Florida. Between 1702 and 1704, all of the Apalachee missions were destroyed and abandoned. The Spanish and the Apalachees burned San Luis and left just 2 days before British and Creek Indian attackers reached it on July 31st, 1704. Angry because the Spanish failed to protect them and unhappy with their harsh treatment at the hands of some Spaniards, many Apalachees chose to go north with the British and the Creeks. Others moved west to Pensacola and Mobile. A few Apalachees went with the Spanish to St. Augustine. About 60 years later, in 1763, Spain gave Florida to the British. The Spanish population of St. Augustine and the Christian Indians who lived there went to Cuba. The Apalachees never returned to their homeland. As you walk around Mission San Luis today, pretend it is 1700 and try to imagine you are visiting the busy community that existed here 3 centuries ago.